There is something happening right now that most people are not seeing. Not because it is hidden from them, not because someone concealed it, but because they are looking at the surface of what is happening and stopping there, accepting the surface as the whole story, never asking what lies beneath it. You are here because something in you refused to stop at the surface. Something in you has always known that what you can see is not all there is. That the reality most people agree to call real is the thinnest possible layer, stretched over something far deeper, far stranger, and far more alive than anything the surface can show you. Today, we are not going to stay at the surface. Today, we are going to do something that most conversations about reality, about consciousness, about what some call ascension or awakening, have never actually done. We are going to go beneath the spiritual explanation and find the quantum mechanics underneath it. Then we are going to go beneath the quantum mechanics and find the ancient knowing underneath that. And then, beneath all of that, we are going to find something that has been waiting for you specifically in the exact configuration of awareness you are arriving with right now. The idea that not everyone is going to the same reality is not new. You have probably heard some version of it, maybe in a spiritual context, maybe in conversations about timelines or dimensions or frequencies. Maybe you have felt it yourself, that strange sensation that the world you are living in is becoming increasingly different from the world that people around you seem to inhabit. Like you are standing in the same room, but experiencing entirely different rooms. That feeling is real, but the explanation you have been given for it, the surface explanation, the one that talks about councils and motherships and corridors of light closing, that explanation is the outermost layer of something that goes much, much deeper. And when you see what is actually beneath it, something shifts. Not because the deeper layer is less extraordinary than the surface, but because it is more extraordinary in a way that actually holds up, in a way that is not asking you to believe something, in a way that is showing you something that is already verifiably, provably happening in the fabric of reality itself. So, let us begin at the surface. Let us look at what most people accept as the explanation, and then let us lift that veil. The surface version of what is happening goes something like this. Humanity is ascending. Some people are vibrating at a higher frequency and moving into a new dimension, often called the fifth dimension. Others are remaining in the third dimension. The split between these realities is happening now, or is imminent, and whether you make it through depends on your vibrational state, your spiritual readiness, your ability to release fear and density and attachment to the old paradigm. That is the surface. And there is something real in it, something that points toward a genuine phenomenon. But it is the thinnest possible layer of what is actually occurring. And the problem with staying at this surface is not that it is entirely wrong. The problem is that it is incomplete in a way that actually makes it less useful, less empowering, and less true than what lies beneath it. Because when you stay at the surface, you get a story. And stories, even beautiful ones, even ones that carry genuine insight, are not the same as understanding. Understanding is what happens when you go beneath the story and find the mechanism, the actual structure of what is happening, the layer underneath the narrative. And here is something worth sitting with before we go further. The surface story has a particular emotional signature. It feels urgent. It feels like something is being decided right now, and whether you are on the right side of the decision depends on how spiritually prepared you are. It produces a specific kind of anxiety dressed up as excitement, a specific kind of separation dressed up as elevation. And that emotional signature, that urgency, and that subtle fear of not making it, is itself a surface phenomenon. It is what the story feels like from the outside. From the inside, from the layer beneath the story, the quality of what is actually happening feels entirely different. It feels less like a cosmic sorting and more like a deepening, less like a departure and more like an arrival. And that distinction matters enormously because the emotional quality of the framework you are operating from is not separate from the reality you are collapsing into experience. But we will get to that. So let us go there. Let us go beneath the surface of the timeline split story and find what is actually happening in the structure of reality. And to do that, we have to start with something that quantum mechanics discovered more than a century ago, something that should have permanently altered the way humanity understands reality, but mostly did not, because most people encountered the surface explanation and stopped there. Here is what they found. When physicists began looking at the smallest components of matter, they expected to find tiny solid things, little particles, miniature versions of the solid world we can see and touch. What they found instead was something that defied every assumption about what reality is made of. They found that particles, the building blocks of everything you have ever seen or touched or thought of as real, do not exist in fixed, definite states until they are observed. Before observation, a particle does not have a single location. It has a probability distribution. It exists as a superposition of all its possible states simultaneously. It is, in the most literal and measurable sense, in multiple places at once, in multiple states at once, in multiple potential realities at once. And then something happens. The moment a measurement is made, the moment observation occurs, the probability wave collapses. The infinite superposition of possibilities resolves into a single, definite outcome. One location, one state, one reality. This is called wave function collapse, and it is not a metaphor. It is not a spiritual concept dressed in scientific language. It is a measured, replicated, mathematically precise description of what actually happens at the foundation of physical reality. Now here is where it gets extraordinary. And here is where most people stop at the surface. The surface version of this discovery says, observation affects the outcome at the quantum level, which is true, but the layer beneath that is what changes everything. The deeper question is this: what is observation? What does it mean for something to be observed? What is the thing that causes the probability wave to collapse into a single reality? And this is where quantum mechanics goes somewhere that most people, even most physicists, are not fully comfortable sitting with. Because the evidence, the actual experimental evidence, points towards something that should change everything about how you understand your relationship to reality. Observation is not simply detection. It is not just a photon bouncing off a particle and being recorded by a machine. The collapse of the wave function is connected, in ways that are still being rigorously investigated, to the nature of information and the nature of the observer itself. What becomes real, what collapses from possibility into actuality, is not independent of the system doing the observing. Consider what that means for a moment, not as a philosophical abstraction, as a literal structural description of what is happening beneath the surface of everything you have ever touched, seen, or called real. Every object in your field of vision right now, the screen in front of you, the walls around you, the surface of your own hands, is not the solid, fixed, independent thing it appears to be at the surface. It is a collapsed probability. It is one specific outcome selected from an infinite field of possible outcomes by the act of observation itself. The solidity is real, but the solidity is not the whole story. It is the surface of something that, one layer down, is pure possibility, pure potential. A field of infinite superposed states, waiting for observation to determine which one becomes real. And here is the layer beneath that. If reality at its most fundamental level is a field of probability, a superposition of all possible states, and if what collapses that probability into a specific experienced reality is connected to the nature of the observer, then reality is not a fixed, single thing that everyone is looking at from different angles. Reality is something that is actively, continuously, moment by moment, being shaped by the nature of the observation being directed at it. Not everyone is looking at the same quantum field in the same way. Not everyone is collapsing the same probabilities into the same actualities. And this is not mysticism. This is the layer beneath the surface of what quantum mechanics actually found. But there is a layer beneath that, because what we just described is the mechanism, the how. But beneath the mechanism is a question that goes even deeper. Why would different observers collapse different realities? What is it about the nature of different observers that would cause them to be, in a measurable structural sense, inhabiting genuinely different versions of what appears to be the same world? And this is where we have to go somewhere that the scientific conversation and the spiritual conversation have both been circling around for a very long time, each from their own side, each using their own language, each pointing at the same thing from different directions. The answer has to do with the structure of awareness itself, with what you might call, in the most precise and non-vague sense possible, the frequency of consciousness. Now, I want to be very careful here, because the word frequency has been used in spiritual conversations in ways that are often imprecise, often metaphorical, in a way that loses its actual meaning, often reduced to a kind of shorthand that points vaguely at something without actually showing you what it is. So let us go beneath the shorthand. let us find the actual layer underneath it. Your nervous system is, among other things, an electromagnetic system. Your brain generates measurable electromagnetic fields. Your heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond your physical body and is measurable with sensitive instruments. Every cell in your body has an electrical potential across its membrane. You are, in the most literal and measurable sense, an electromagnetic field generator, a system that is continuously emitting and receiving electromagnetic information. And the state of that electromagnetic system, the patterns it generates, the coherence or incoherence of those patterns, the specific frequencies dominant within those patterns, all of that is not static. It changes based on what you are experiencing, what you are feeling, what you are thinking, what you are believing about reality, what stories you are running about who you are, and what is possible. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable physiology. This is what the field of neurocardiology has been documenting for decades. The electromagnetic field generated by your heart, which is far stronger than the electromagnetic field generated by your brain, changes its coherence patterns based on your emotional state. Fear, anxiety, and chronic stress generate incoherent, chaotic field patterns. States of genuine care, gratitude, and what researchers call positive emotional coherence generate ordered, coherent field patterns. And these patterns are not just internal experiences, they are fields that extend into the space around you and that interact with the electromagnetic environment you are in. There is something hidden in plain sight within that finding. The quality of what you are feeling is not just a subjective inner experience that stays inside you and has no effect on the world around you. It is a field signature. It is an electromagnetic broadcast. It is a specific pattern of information being sent out from the system that is you into the field that surrounds you. And that broadcast is continuous. It does not stop when you are not paying attention to it. It does not pause when you are distracted or asleep or going through the motions of an ordinary day. Your electromagnetic field is always broadcasting, always interfacing with the quantum probability field that underlies physical reality, always participating in the selection of what gets collapsed out of infinite possibility into your experienced moment. Now, here is where the layer lifts. If you are a field-generating system, and if the nature of your field, its coherence, its dominant frequencies, its patterns, affects how you interact with the quantum probability field that underlies physical reality, then different people with genuinely different electromagnetic field signatures are not just experiencing the same reality differently in a subjective, interpretive sense. They are, in a structural sense, interfacing with the quantum field in genuinely different ways. collapsing different probabilities into their experienced reality, selecting from the infinite superposition of what is possible, different actualities. Not everyone is going to the same reality, not because of councils or corridors or cosmic punishments, but because of the physics of observation, because of the electromagnetic structure of the observer, because the field you are generating is determining, at the most fundamental level of reality, what you are collapsing out of possibility and into experience. That is the layer beneath the surface of the timeline split story. But there is a layer beneath that. Because if this is true, if the nature of the observer is genuinely determining the nature of the observed reality, then the most important question is not whether a split is happening. The most important question is, what determines the nature of your field? What shapes the electromagnetic signature of your awareness? What is it that you can actually work with, actually change, actually develop in order to shift the reality you are collapsing into experience? And this is where we have to go somewhere that the scientific conversation alone cannot take us. Because the scientific conversation, as rigorous and precise as it is still relatively new to these questions. A few hundred years of systematic investigation. And there is another layer of knowing that is much, much older. If this transmission is reaching a layer in you that you want to go deeper with, like this video and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. The ancient wisdom traditions across cultures, across continents, across millennia, mapped the interior territory of human consciousness with extraordinary precision, not using instruments, not using the language of quantum mechanics or electromagnetic fields, but using the language they had, the metaphors available to them, the frameworks that their particular cultural moment provided. And what they mapped, when you strip away the cultural overlay and look at the structural understanding beneath it, is remarkably consistent with what quantum mechanics is now discovering from the outside. The Vedic tradition of ancient India described reality as layered. The visible, physical world, what they called the gross realm, was understood as the outermost, densest layer of something that became progressively more subtle and more fundamental as you moved inward. Beneath the physical was the vital or energetic layer. Beneath that, the mental layer. Beneath that, the layer of pure awareness. And at the deepest level, something they called Brahman, pure undifferentiated consciousness, the ground of all being, the field from which all specific realities arise. What is extraordinary about this framework is not just its sophistication, it is its structural accuracy. The Vedic seers were not describing a cosmology they had been told about. They were describing a territory they had explored directly through systematic, rigorous, reproducible practices of turning awareness inward and mapping what they found there. And what they found, layer by layer, moving from the gross toward the subtle, is a map that corresponds with remarkable precision to what quantum mechanics is now finding, moving from the surface toward the foundational, using instruments and mathematics instead of meditation and inquiry. The outermost layer is the most solid, the most fixed, the most apparently independent. The deeper layers are progressively more fluid, more relational, more fundamentally probabilistic. And at the deepest layer, there is not a thing at all. There is a field, a ground, a pure potentiality from which all specific things arise. The Hermetic tradition of ancient Egypt and Greece said, "As above, so below. As within, so without." The structure of the inner world mirrors and determines the structure of the outer world. The macrocosm and the microcosm are not separate systems. They are the same system observed from different scales. This principle, which sounds like a poetic metaphor when you encounter it at the surface, becomes something entirely different when you look at the layer beneath it. As within, so without is not a spiritual sentiment. It is a structural description of the relationship between the observer and the observed. It is saying that the inner configuration of awareness, the patterns, the coherence, the dominant frequencies of the field you are generating from the inside, are structurally reflected in the outer reality you are experiencing. Not because the outer world is a literal mirror of your thoughts, but because the quantum field that underlies both inner and outer experience is the same field. And the nature of the awareness engaging with that field from the inside is determining what gets selected from it on the outside. The Taoist tradition of ancient China described the Tao, the underlying field or way, as the source from which all specific things emerge. The 10,000 things, the entire manifest world, arise from the Tao, the unmanifest ground. And the practice of Taoism was essentially the practice of aligning your individual nature with the nature of that underlying field. There is something hidden in this teaching that most people who encounter Taoism at the surface level miss entirely. The Tao is not a passive background. It is not simply the empty space from which things emerge. It is the active principle of organization, of pattern, of the way things naturally move when they are not being forced against their own nature. The practice of aligning with the Tao is not a practice of passivity or surrender in the sense of giving up. It is a practice of releasing the surface level, ego-driven, fear-based interference patterns that prevent the deeper intelligence of the field from expressing itself through you. It is, in our language, a practice of shifting from incoherent to coherent observation, from contracted to expanded field signature, from surface identification to depth recognition. The Buddhist tradition described reality as dependently originated. Nothing exists independently, in isolation, with a fixed inherent nature. Everything arises in relationship, in dependence on conditions, including the conditions of the observer. The self that seems to be looking at a fixed, independent reality is itself a construction, a pattern arising from conditions, not a solid, separate entity observing a solid, separate world. And beneath this teaching is something that most people who encounter Buddhism at the surface level find either deeply liberating or deeply threatening, depending on which layer of themselves they are hearing it from. If the self is not a solid, independent, fixed thing, if it is a pattern arising from conditions, then it is not trapped. It is not locked into a particular reality by its inherent nature. It is not condemned to a particular level of experience by what it fundamentally is, because what it fundamentally is not a fixed thing at all. It is a process, a pattern, a temporary, local, particular expression of the same field that underlies everything. And patterns can change, processes can deepen, temporary configurations can recognize their own depth. These traditions, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, are all pointing at the same layer beneath the surface of ordinary experience. They are all saying in their own language, what you see is not what is. The visible, solid, fixed world is the outermost layer of something that is fundamentally fluid, fundamentally relational, fundamentally responsive to the nature of the awareness engaging with it. And they did not just describe this, they developed practices, systematic, rigorous, tested over millennia practices for actually shifting the nature of the observer, for changing the electromagnetic signature, in our language, of the field of awareness, for moving from an observer that collapses a limited, contracted, fear-based reality out of the quantum field, to an observer that collapses a more expanded, more coherent, more possibility-rich reality. Meditation, contemplation, breathwork, ritual, sacred geometry, mantra. The specific technologies varied by tradition, but the underlying mechanism was the same. Train the observer, refine the field of awareness, change what you are collapsing out of infinite possibility. And here is what is remarkable about that convergence. These traditions did not have access to each other's findings in most cases. They were not coordinating their maps. They were not comparing notes across continents and centuries. They arrived at the same structural understanding independently, because they were all exploring the same territory, the interior landscape of consciousness, and finding the same layers beneath the surface, the same progression from gross to subtle, the same recognition that the observer is not separate from the observed, the same practical conclusion that the most important work a human being can do is not to change the outer world by force, but to deepen the quality of awareness that is engaging with it. This is the layer beneath the ancient wisdom, and it is the same layer that quantum mechanics is now finding from the opposite direction. But there is still a deeper layer, and to show it to you, I want to tell you a story. There is a city. It has been built over thousands of years, layer upon layer, each generation building on top of what the previous generation left behind. The streets of the current city are paved over the streets of an older city. The foundations of the current buildings rest on the ruins of older buildings, and beneath those ruins, deeper still, there are layers that most of the current city's inhabitants have never seen and do not know exist. two people live in this city. Their names are Mara and Elias. Mara has lived in the city her whole life. She knows its streets, its rhythms, its patterns. She knows which neighborhoods are dangerous and which are safe. She knows what to expect and what not to expect. She has, over the course of her life, built a very detailed and very complete map of the city, and she trusts that map completely because it has served her. It has kept her safe. It has helped her navigate. Elias also lives in the city. He grew up on the same streets, in the same neighborhoods. He had the same map. But something happened to Elias, some experience, some crack in the ordinary, some moment when the city he thought he knew showed him something that was not on the map. And that moment sent him downward, into the layers beneath the streets. Elias began to explore the ruins beneath the current city, and what he found there changed the way he understood the city he was living in. Because from beneath, you can see the structure. You can see why the streets run the way they run, because they follow the paths of older streets, which followed the paths of even older ones, which followed the natural contours of the landscape that existed before any city was there at all. From beneath, you can see that the city is not what it appears to be from the surface. It is not a fixed, permanent, solid thing. It is a temporary pattern, the current layer of an ongoing process, resting on layers that tell a completely different story. When Elias comes back to the surface and walks the same streets as Mara, he is walking through a genuinely different city. Not because the streets have changed, but because he knows what is beneath them. Because his awareness now includes the layers that Mara's awareness does not include. And this is not a small difference. It is not just a matter of having more information. It changes what he notices. It changes what he is drawn toward. It changes what possibilities he sees in the space around him, because he knows the space is not just what it appears to be on the surface. He knows it has depth. He knows it has layers. He knows that the surface is not the limit of what is there. Mara and Elias are walking through the same city, but they are not inhabiting the same reality. And here is what matters. Elias did not ascend. He did not leave. He did not go somewhere else. He went deeper. He went beneath the surface of the reality they both shared. And that depth, that awareness of layers, changed the nature of the reality he was experiencing from the inside out. There is something else worth noting about Elias. The depth did not make him distant from the city or from Mara. It did not make him superior to the streets he walked or contemptuous of the people who did not know what was beneath them. If anything, it made the city more vivid to him, more textured, more alive, because he was not just seeing the surface. He was seeing the surface and the depth simultaneously. He was experiencing the city as what it actually is, a layered thing, a temporary pattern resting on ancient patterns, a specific configuration of something far larger and far older than any of its current inhabitants. And that experience, that double vision, that simultaneous awareness of surface and depth, is not a burden. It is an extraordinary richness of experience that the surface alone can never provide. This is what is actually happening when we talk about different realities, different timelines, different dimensions of experience. It is not primarily a spatial separation. It is not that some people are being transported to a different location while others are left behind. It is that some people are experiencing reality from a depth of awareness that includes layers that others are not yet accessing. And that difference in depth of awareness is, in the most literal quantum mechanical sense, generating genuinely different experienced realities. Because remember what we found beneath the surface of the physics. The observer is not separate from the observed. The nature of the awareness that is looking is determining what is being collapsed out of the quantum field of probability into experienced actuality. Different observers, with genuinely different depths and qualities of awareness, are collapsing different realities. Not everyone is going to the same reality, not because of who is good and who is bad, not because of punishment and reward, but because not everyone is observing from the same depth. Not everyone is bringing the same quality of awareness to the quantum field, and the quantum field is responding, as it always has, as it always does, with precise, impersonal, mechanical faithfulness to the nature of what is observing it. Pause here for a moment and ask yourself, what is the layer you have been sensing beneath the surface of your own reality? The one you could feel but could not yet name? Drop it in the comments. Not as a performance, but because naming what you have sensed is the first act of actually seeing it. Now, here is the layer that most people never reach, the layer beneath all of this. If the reality you are experiencing is being shaped by the nature of your awareness, and if the nature of your awareness can be deliberately trained, deliberately developed, deliberately deepened, then the question of which reality you inhabit is not a fixed, predetermined thing. It is not something that was decided before you got here. It is not something that is happening to you. It is something that is continuously, moment by moment, being generated by the quality of attention you are bringing to existence. And this means something that should stop you completely. You are not waiting for a reality shift. You are the reality shift. Or you are not, depending on the depth of awareness you are operating from right now. Let us sit with that for a moment, because this is the layer that changes everything about how you understand what is happening. The surface version of the ascension story, the one about dimensions and frequencies and who makes it and who does not, positions you as a passenger, as someone who either has the right ticket or does not, as someone who is either vibrating at the right frequency or is too dense to make the journey. It is a story in which something is happening to you or happening around you, and your role is essentially to be in the right state when it arrives. But the layer beneath that story, the quantum mechanical layer, the ancient wisdom layer, the layer that has been hidden in plain sight beneath every spiritual teaching about consciousness and reality. That layer says something completely different. It says, you are not the passenger. You are the observer. And the observer is not waiting for reality to change. The observer is the mechanism by which reality is being determined, right now, in this moment, and in every moment. This is not a small distinction. This is the difference between a fundamentally passive relationship with reality and a fundamentally active one. Between waiting to be selected and understanding that you are already selecting continuously through the nature of the awareness you are bringing to each moment. And the work, the actual work, is not about achieving some special state that will transport you to a better dimension. The work is about deepening the quality of your observation, about developing the capacity to bring a more coherent, more expanded, more inclusive awareness to the quantum field of your experience. Because the more coherent and expanded that awareness is, the more of the field's depth you are accessing, the more layers you are including in your observation, and therefore, the more of the field's possibilities you are collapsing into your experience reality. Let me show you what this looks like in practice, because this is not abstract, this is not philosophical. This is something you can actually do right now in the next few minutes that will give you a direct experience of what we are talking about. I want you to do something simple. Look at whatever is in front of you right now. Your screen, the room around you, whatever your eyes are resting on. Look at it the way you normally look at it. Notice what you notice. Notice what your attention goes to automatically. Notice what you are registering as real, as present, as relevant. Now, do something different. Instead of looking at the surface of what is in front of you, I want you to become aware of the space, not the things in the space itself, the invisible, apparently empty space that the objects in your field of vision are floating in, the space between you and the screen, the space between the objects in the room, the space that is, in a very real quantum mechanical sense, not empty at all, but filled with the quantum field, the probability field, the ground of all the specific things that are appearing within it. Just become aware of that space. Do not try to see anything in it. Just let your awareness expand to include it, to rest in it, to recognize it as present. Notice what happens to your state when you do this. Notice whether something shifts in the quality of your experience. Notice whether the room feels different, whether your sense of what is real expands slightly, whether there is a quality of openness or depth that was not present a moment ago when you were looking only at the surfaces. That shift, that small but unmistakable shift in the quality of your experience, is not nothing. That is your awareness beginning to include a layer of reality that was present the whole time, but was not being registered. That is the difference between surface observation and depth observation. And it is, in the most literal sense, a change in the nature of the observer that changes the nature of the observed reality. Now imagine doing this not just for 30 seconds, but as a cultivated, ongoing quality of awareness. Imagine developing the capacity to move through your daily life with that expanded, space-inclusive quality of attention. Imagine what reality looks like, what possibilities become visible, what you begin to notice and be drawn toward, and collapse out of the quantum field. When you are operating from that depth of observation consistently. This is what the ancient traditions were actually training. This is what the contemplative practices across every wisdom tradition were actually developing. Not belief, not the right doctrine, not membership in the right spiritual group, the actual, practical, trainable capacity to observe from greater depth, to include more of the field in your awareness, to collapse more of the field's possibilities into your experienced reality. And this is what the quantum mechanics is pointing at from the other direction. The observer matters. The nature of the observation matters. What you bring to the act of perceiving reality is not separate from what you perceive. But there is a layer beneath even this. And it is the deepest layer we are going to reach today. Everything we have discussed so far, the quantum mechanics, the electromagnetic fields, the ancient practices, the depth of observation, all of it has been pointing at something. All of it has been circling around a recognition that is, in some sense, the core of what every genuine wisdom tradition has been trying to transmit. The thing that is hidden beneath all the layers, the thing that was always there, waiting for your awareness to go deep enough to find it. Here it is. The field of infinite possibility that quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter is not separate from you. You are not an observer standing outside the field, looking at it, interacting with it, influencing it from a distance. You are an expression of it. You are the field becoming aware of itself in a particular, local, temporary configuration. And the depth of your awareness, the quality of your observation, is the field recognizing itself, going from the surface of its own expression, the specific local temporary you, back toward the depth of what it actually is. The mystics said it in different ways. The Vedantic tradition said, Atman is Brahman. The individual self is identical with the universal ground of being. The Sufi tradition said, the drop is the ocean. The Buddhist tradition said, the nature of mind is Buddha nature, pure awareness, the ground of all experience. The Hermetic tradition said, you are the microcosm of the macrocosm. The individual is the universal in miniature. What quantum mechanics found from the outside, with instruments and mathematics, is the same thing these traditions found from the inside, through systematic exploration of the nature of awareness. The field of infinite possibility is not out there. It is not a place you go to. It is what you are, at the deepest layer of what you are. And the split, the genuine, real, experiential split between different realities that different people are inhabiting, is not a split between people who are going somewhere and people who are being left behind. It is a split between the depth from which different people are experiencing their identity, between those who are identified with the surface layer, the specific local temporary configuration, the personality, the story, the fears and attachments and fixed beliefs about what is real, and those who are beginning to recognize in their direct experience the depth of what they actually are, the field itself, the ground of infinite possibility, the quantum source of all specific realities. When you are identified with the surface, you experience a surface reality. Fixed, limited, governed by the rules and constraints of the surface layer, subject to all the forces that operate at the surface level. When you begin to recognize your identity at the depth, when you begin to experience yourself not just as the specific configuration, but as the field that is generating the specific configuration, reality changes. Not because you go somewhere else, but because you are now observing from a different depth. And the observer, as we have established, determines what is collapsed out of the quantum field of possibility. This is the deepest layer. This is what has been hidden beneath all the other layers. This is what the ancient traditions were pointing at with their language of enlightenment and liberation and awakening. Not a destination, not a dimension you travel to, a depth of self-recognition, a shift in the layer from which you are experiencing your own existence. And here is what this means for the question we started with. Not everyone is going to the same reality. This is true, but not in the way the surface story tells it. The split is not between good people and bad people. It is not between spiritually advanced souls and spiritually primitive ones. It is not between those who have the right beliefs and those who have the wrong ones. It is not between those who are ascending and those who are being left behind. The split is between depth and surface, between those who are beginning to observe from the depth of what they actually are, and those who are still identified entirely with the surface layer. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that makes this genuinely different from the surface version of the story, is that the split is not fixed. It is not predetermined. It is not happening to you based on some cosmic assessment of your worthiness. It is happening through you, continuously, in every moment, based on the depth of awareness you are bringing to this moment, and this one, and this one. Every time you expand your awareness to include the space behind the surface, every time you notice the quantum field beneath the solid appearance of things, every time you catch yourself identified with the surface story and recognize the deeper layer of what you are, every time you bring coherence and depth to your observation of reality, you are shifting the layer from which you are experiencing existence. You are moving in the most literal sense into a different reality, not a different location, a different depth of the same infinite field. And the people around you who are not doing this, who are entirely identified with the surface, who are experiencing a fixed, limited, fear-governed reality, they are not going somewhere else. They are staying at the surface. And the distance between you is not spatial. It is a distance of depth, a difference in how many layers of reality you are including in your awareness. This is why the experience of being in different realities from the people around you is so disorienting and so real at the same time. You are in the same room, you are having conversations, you are sharing physical space. But you are not experiencing the same room because you are observing from different depths. And different depths of observation collapse genuinely different realities out of the same quantum field. Now I want to address something directly, because there is a layer beneath the question of what is happening that we have not yet fully explored. And it is the layer that determines whether any of this actually matters to you personally. Think about a moment when you saw through an illusion you had been living inside, when something you had accepted as fixed reality suddenly revealed itself as just the surface of something else. What was beneath it? Share that in the comments, because what you discovered belongs in this field too. Why does any of this matter? Not in the abstract, not as an interesting idea about reality, but to you in your actual life, in your actual experience right now. Here is the answer. And it is the most practical thing I am going to say in this entire transmission. Every pattern in your life that feels stuck, every limitation that seems fixed, every reality that seems impossible to change exists at the surface level. It exists in the layer where things appear solid and fixed and determined, and it looks completely real from the surface. It looks like a wall, like a fact, like the way things are. But beneath that surface, at the quantum level, at the level of the field of infinite possibility, that wall does not exist. That limitation is not a fixed feature of reality. It is a probability that has been collapsed repeatedly by an observer with a particular electromagnetic signature, bringing a particular quality of awareness to the quantum field, and selecting from infinite possibility the same limitation over and over again. Not consciously, not deliberately, but mechanically, the way a radio tuned to a particular frequency receives only what is broadcast at that frequency, not because other broadcasts do not exist, but because the tuning of the receiver determines what is received. When you change the tuning of the receiver, you receive different broadcasts. When you change the depth of your observation, you collapse different probabilities. When you shift the electromagnetic signature of your awareness from the incoherent, contracted, fear-based patterns of surface identification to the coherent, expanded, open patterns of depth recognition, the quantum field responds. Not because you have done something magical, but because you have changed the nature of the observer, and the observer determines the observed. This is not a promise. This is not a guarantee of specific outcomes. The quantum field is not a vending machine. You do not put in the right frequency and receive the desired result. It is far more subtle and far more profound than that. What shifts when you observe from depth is not that you get what you want. What shifts is that you begin to experience a reality that is genuinely different in its fundamental quality. More open, more possibility rich, more responsive to genuine intention, more coherent in its patterns, more aligned with what is actually real, beneath the surface of what has been agreed to be real. The specific forms that this takes in your life will be specific to you, to your particular configuration, to your particular depth of recognition, to the specific probabilities you are beginning to collapse differently. But the direction is consistent. Depth of observation produces a more expansive, more coherent, more possibility-rich experienced reality. Surface identification produces a more contracted, more limited, more fixed experienced reality. This is not a spiritual teaching. This is the quantum mechanics of the observer effect. Apply to the most important observer in your reality. You. Let me go back to Mara and Elias for a moment, because there is a layer of their story we have not yet reached. When Elias comes back from the depths beneath the city and tries to tell Mara what he found, something interesting happens. Mara does not dismiss him. She is curious. She has always had a sense that there is something beneath the surface of the city she cannot quite see, something that explains why certain things happen the way they do, something that the surface map does not account for. But she is also afraid, because going beneath the surface means leaving the surface. It means leaving the map she has trusted her whole life. It means being in territory that is unmapped, unfamiliar, where the rules she knows do not apply in the same way. And Elias understands this because he was afraid too. The moment when the surface cracked and showed him the layer beneath, it was not comfortable. It was disorienting. It was destabilizing. The map he had trusted was suddenly revealed to be a map of the surface only. And for a moment, he did not know how to navigate. But then something happened. He realized that the disorientation was not a sign that he was lost. It was a sign that he was going deeper than the map had gone, that he was in territory that required a different kind of navigation. Not the surface map, but something more fundamental, something more like an internal compass than an external chart. And that internal compass, the capacity to navigate from depth rather than from the surface map, is what the ancient traditions were actually developing. It is what meditation develops, what contemplative practice develops, what any genuine practice of self-inquiry develops, not a new, better surface map, but the capacity to navigate from the depth of what you actually are, rather than from the surface story about who you are and what is real. There is one more thing about Mara that the story does not tell you at the surface level. Her curiosity, that persistent nagging sense that there is something beneath the city she cannot quite see, is not an accident. It is not a personality quirk. It is the field recognizing itself through her. It is the depth calling to the surface, the way the deeper layers of the earth call to the surface through the pressure that eventually cracks the pavement and lets something ancient and unexpected emerge into the light. Mara's curiosity is the first movement of the depth in her. And Elias, by returning and speaking honestly about what he found, is not teaching her something foreign. He is reflecting back to her something that is already present in her, already moving in her, already pressing upward through the layers of the map she has trusted her whole life. This is what genuine transmission does. Not the transmission of information, the transmission of recognition. The pointing at the layer that is already present but not yet named. This is the practical implication of everything we have covered today. The practices that actually matter, the ones that actually shift the layer from which you are experiencing reality, are not about adding more surface content, more beliefs, more information, more spiritual concepts. They are about developing the capacity to observe from greater depth, to include more of the field in your awareness, to recognize in your direct experience the layer beneath the surface of what you think you are. And this is where I want to give you something concrete, something you can take from this transmission and actually work with. Not a belief system, not a doctrine, a practice, an actual, repeatable way of shifting the depth of your observation. Here is what it looks like. At least once each day, find a moment to do what we did earlier, but go further with it. Sit somewhere. Let your eyes soften so that you are not focusing on any particular surface, and instead of looking at the world, become aware of the awareness that is doing the looking, not what you are aware of, the awareness itself. Notice that there is something that is aware of everything you experience, that there is a quality of knowing, of presence, of simple being here-ness that is present in every experience you have. That is present right now as you are hearing these words. That was present this morning when you woke up. That was present in your earliest memories. That has been the constant, unchanging background of every experience you have ever had. That quality of awareness, that simple, undeniable presence that is always already here, is not a surface phenomenon. It is not generated by your thoughts or your emotions or your circumstances. It is the depth. It is the field, becoming aware of itself in the particular configuration that is you. When you rest your attention there, even briefly, even imperfectly, something shifts. The quality of your electromagnetic field shifts. The coherence of your observation shifts. And therefore, in the most literal quantum mechanical sense, the reality you are collapsing out of the field of infinite possibility shifts. This is not dramatic. It does not feel like being transported to another dimension. It feels quiet. It feels like a deepening, like the room becoming more present, more alive, more real, not less. Like the surface becoming more transparent, showing you the depth beneath it rather than concealing it. And over time, with practice, that depth of observation becomes more available, more stable, more continuously present. The surface does not disappear. You still navigate the surface. You still live in the world of specific things and specific circumstances. But you navigate it from the depth, from the recognition of the field beneath it, and from that recognition, the reality you are collapsing is genuinely, structurally, measurably different. Here is the layer within the practice that most people miss when they first encounter it. The instruction to become aware of the awareness itself sounds paradoxical. It sounds like trying to see your own eye, or trying to taste your own tongue, and at the surface level it is paradoxical, because at the surface level awareness is always pointing outward, always directed at an object, always defined by what it is aware of. The surface identity, the one that knows itself as a specific person with a specific history in a specific situation, cannot find the awareness itself by looking for it as an object. Because the awareness is not an object, it is the subject. It is the looker, not the looked at. But when you genuinely attempt this, when you genuinely turn the attention back toward its own source, something happens that is not paradox at all. There is a recognition. A simple, quiet, unmistakable recognition of the presence that is already here. Not a new experience, not something you have never encountered before. The most familiar thing in your entire existence, so familiar that you have been overlooking it the way you overlook the air you are breathing. The awareness that has been the background of every experience you have ever had, suddenly noticed as the background, suddenly recognized as present, suddenly seen, not as an object, but as what is seeing. That recognition, however brief, however imperfect, is the depth touching itself. The field recognizing itself through the particular configuration that is you. And in that moment of recognition, the electromagnetic signature of your field shifts, not because you have done something, but because the nature of the observer has changed. The observer has gone from being identified with the surface to being recognized as the depth. And the quantum field, as always, responds to the nature of what is observing it. This is what the split is actually about. This is the layer beneath the surface of the timeline split story. Not a cosmic sorting of souls into different dimensions. A practical, ongoing, moment-by-moment divergence between those who are observing from depth and those who are observing from surface. Between those who are including more of the quantum field in their awareness and those who are collapsing only the most contracted, most familiar, most surface-level probabilities. And the invitation, the genuine invitation beneath all the layers we have peeled back today, is not to believe something different. It is not to join a group or follow a teaching or achieve a particular state. It is to go deeper, right now, in your actual experience, in the quality of awareness you are bringing to this moment. Because the moment you begin to observe from depth, even slightly, even imperfectly, the reality you are experiencing begins to change. Not because you have done something magical, but because you have changed the nature of the observer. And the observer, as quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter, is not separate from what is observed. You are not a passenger in a reality that is happening to you. You are the observer, through which a specific reality is being selected, moment by moment, from the infinite field of what is possible, and the depth from which you observe is the most important variable in that selection. This is what was hidden beneath the surface of every ascension teaching you have ever encountered. This is the layer that changes everything about how you understand what is happening in the world and what your role in it actually is. Now, I want to address one more layer, because there is something that comes up when people genuinely start to engage with this, genuinely start to practice observing from depth, genuinely start to experience the shift in reality that comes from changing the nature of the observer. And it is important enough that we need to go beneath it before we close. When you begin to experience a genuinely different reality from the people around you, when the depth of your observation begins to produce a different quality of experience, there is a temptation. And it is a subtle one, almost invisible, hidden right at the surface of the recognition itself. The temptation is to make it a story about separation, about being different from, more advanced than, further along than the people who are not seeing what you are seeing, about being one of the ones who is going to the better reality while others are left behind, about your depth of awareness being a mark of distinction, of specialness, of having made it while others have not. This is the surface layer of the depth recognition. It is the ego, the surface identity, appropriating the depth experience and turning it back into a surface story. And it is almost universal. Almost everyone who begins to genuinely access deeper layers of awareness goes through a period where the depth recognition gets co-opted by the surface identity and turned into a new, more sophisticated version of the same old story. A story about me and them, about the awakened and the unawakened, about those who are ascending and those who are being left behind. And here is the layer beneath that temptation, the one that dissolves it. If the deepest layer of what you are is the field itself, the ground of infinite possibility, the quantum source of all specific realities, then the deepest layer of what everyone else is also the field, the same field. There is only one field. There is only one ground of being. There is only one quantum probability space from which all specific realities are being collapsed. The split is not between different fields. It is between different depths of recognition of the same field. And the recognition of depth does not separate you from those who are at the surface. It reveals your fundamental non-separation from them. Because at the depth, there is no separation. There is only the field, expressing itself in an infinite variety of specific configurations, each one a temporary, local, particular expression of the same infinite ground. This is the layer beneath the separation story, and it is the most important one, because the moment you access it, the moment you actually feel it in your direct experience rather than just understanding it as a concept, the entire framework of who is going to the better reality and who is being left behind dissolves. Not because the differences in depth of observation are not real. They are real, not because the genuinely different realities that different observers are collapsing are not genuinely different. They are genuinely different. But because the recognition of depth, genuine depth, does not produce a sense of being better than, or further along than, or more special than. It produces something that is almost the opposite. a recognition of the infinite depth in everything, in everyone, in every configuration of the field. A recognition that the person who is entirely identified with the surface is not less than the field. They are the field, just as you are the field, just expressing itself at a different depth of self-recognition in this moment. And from that recognition, the most natural response to the differences in depth of observation is not superiority. It is compassion. The same compassion you might feel for someone who has not yet discovered that there is a beautiful, rich, infinitely deep world beneath the surface of the city they are walking through. Not pity, not judgment, compassion, and perhaps a gentle invitation to look deeper. This is the deepest layer we have reached today, and it is the one that integrates everything else. Not everyone is going to the same reality. This is true. The differences in depth of observation are producing genuinely different experienced realities. The quantum mechanics is real. The electromagnetic field dynamics are real. The ancient wisdom traditions were mapping something real. And beneath all of that, at the deepest layer, there is only one reality, one field, one ground of being, one expressing itself in infinite variety, at infinite depths of self-recognition. And the path is not from this reality to a better one. The path is from the surface of this reality into its infinite depth, into the recognition of what it actually is, what you actually are, what has always been here, beneath everything, waiting for your awareness to go deep enough to find it. The veil between you and this recognition is not a barrier, it is a membrane, and it dissolves the moment your awareness is ready to go through it. Not when you have done enough spiritual work, not when you have achieved the right frequency, not when some cosmic council has determined you are ready, but when you actually look, when you actually direct your awareness beneath the surface of what you think you know. When you actually ask the question that the surface never asks, what is beneath this? You have been asking that question. That is why you are here. That is what brought you to this transmission. Something in you has always known that the surface is not the whole story, that there is more beneath it, that the reality most people agree to call real is the thinnest possible layer of what actually exists. And now you have seen some of what is beneath it. The quantum mechanics, the electromagnetic field dynamics, the ancient wisdom, the parable of depth, the practice of observing from the ground of awareness itself, the recognition that the field and the observer are not separate, the dissolution of the separation story into the recognition of the one field expressing itself at different depths. These are not just ideas, they are layers, and each layer you have moved through in this transmission has brought you closer to the core, to the thing that was hidden beneath everything, to the recognition that has been waiting for you at the center of every veil you have ever lifted. Here is what I want to leave you with. The world is not changing in the way the surface story tells it. It is not splitting into a good dimension and a bad one, with some souls making it and others being left behind. What is happening is both more ordinary and more extraordinary than that. More ordinary because it is happening in the fabric of your daily experience, in the quality of your observation, in the depth of your awareness in each moment. More extraordinary because the depth that is available beneath the surface of your ordinary experience is genuinely infinite. There is no bottom to how deep the field goes. There is no limit to how much of reality becomes available when you observe from greater depth. Every layer you lift reveals not just more truth, it reveals a more powerful version of you. Not powerful in the sense of having more control over the surface, powerful in the sense of being more deeply recognized as what you actually are. The field itself, the ground of infinite possibility, the observer whose observation is determining, in this moment and every moment, what reality is being collapsed out of the quantum field of what is possible. You are not waiting for the split to happen. You are not hoping to be on the right side of it. You are the mechanism through which the split is occurring, or not occurring, in your experience. You are the observer, and the observer is the most important variable in the equation. Go deeper. Not because depth is better than surface, but because depth is where you actually are, beneath the surface story of who you are and what is real, beneath the quantum mechanics of how reality is generated, beneath the ancient maps of the territory of consciousness, at the very center of what has always been here. That is where you find it. The thing that was hidden beneath everything, not hidden from you, hidden in you, waiting for your awareness to go deep enough to recognize what it has always been looking at. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you can see through it. Take a moment before you move on from this transmission, not to think about what you heard, but to feel where it landed, to notice what shifted, to recognize the layer that is now visible that was not visible before you arrived here. Something has changed, not on the surface, beneath it, and what has been revealed cannot be re-hidden. You are no longer only a surface dweller. You have touched the depth, and the depth does not forget being touched. If you know someone who has been sensing that the reality around them is thinner than it appears, someone who is standing at the edge of a layer they can feel but have not yet named, share this transmission with them. When you do that, you are not just sending a video. You are creating a shared depth between two fields of awareness, giving someone access to a layer they sensed but could not reach alone. That act of sharing lifts the veil for both of you. It strengthens the collective capacity to see beneath the surface. And that matters more than it might seem from the surface. If something in this transmission reached a layer in you that you want to explore further, that you want to take deeper, share what you found. Not to perform it, not to demonstrate your depth, but because lifting the veil for yourself and lifting it for someone else are not separate acts. When you share what you found beneath the surface, you are doing for someone else what this transmission did for you. You are pointing at the layer beneath the surface they are standing on. You are inviting them to look deeper. And that invitation, extended from genuine recognition, from the depth of your own experience, is one of the most powerful things one human being can offer another. Drop in the comments what layer you reached today, what shifted, what you saw beneath the surface that you had not seen before. Not because your experience needs to be validated, but because your experience, shared, becomes part of the field that others are observing. And the field, as we now know, responds to what is observing it. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. Welcome to the depth that has no bottom. Welcome to the recognition that changes everything about how you experience reality, without changing a single thing about what is actually there. Because what is actually there, at every depth, was always this, always the field, always the ground, always the infinite possibility that has been waiting patiently for your awareness to go deep enough to find it. It was always here. You just had not looked deep enough yet. Until now. There is a pattern beneath the surface of this recognition that goes even further. The video on self-sabotage reveals how the very mechanism that keeps you at the surface, the hidden structure working against your own depth, has been operating beneath your awareness the whole time. That layer is worth seeing next.